Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. Thank you for joining me once again with another episode of One Track Record. I am your host, Shaina. If you are here for the very first time, welcome, and I hope you enjoy today's content. Now, some of you may be wondering, Shayna, where have you been? You said you were going to post another story. And to that, all I can say is I finally got my voice back and I no longer sound like Pop Smoke. Some of you still may hear it just a tad bit that I'm a bit nasally, and to that, I apologize. I just recovered from one of the nastiest sinus infections of my life. But I am here. I am whole. I am happy. And I thank God. Now, today is an exciting day for more than one reason. Reason number one would be that today's episode marks the genesis of what I'd like to call the friendship series. Some of you may have seen my community feed where it suggested and hinted that I will be talking about friendships, and this I thought was the best way to kind of dive into the idea of friendship. And the second reason, you're just going to have to stick till the end to hear the announcement. But in regards to today's content, trigger warning, I'm good for those. I have to give one because this story is a bit crazy. I'm not even going to hold you. So, today's story deals with the idea of drowning and can also deal with the idea of violence by fire. So, if you're not into that, or if you're not really in the right emotional space to deal with something like this at this time, I totally understand and do what you have to do. Okay, just a disclaimer. And I don't own the rights to any of these pictures that are used today. I don't own the story. I am just here to further spread oral tradition by means of self reflection and self awareness, which is what this channel is all about. We are here to establish and create positive track records with ourselves and with others. So, why this story, Shayna, of the pretty girl and 7 jealous women? Well, let me just give you some backstory first. So, today's story is not one of Germanic, Greek, Italian roots like previously explored with other stories on this channel. This one has West African roots, and I consider this one a challenge for me personally because I'm not here to offend. If anything, I want to be inclusive. And I want to reach as many people as possible because I'm not going to limit myself with one particular culture or a continent. Why not go global with it? So here I am. So aside from that, this story, to be more precise, is of Abibio roots. Now, the Abibio people that were in Southwest Africa and still are. And this story is important because being that the Abibio's way of storytelling was mostly through oral tradition, it's kind of hard to give an exact time frame of when this was first told, but I can tell you when it was first published. So, This story was first published in the year 1910 in a book named Folk Stories from Southern Nigeria. And it was comprised and written by none other than Elphinstone Darrell. I may not be saying the name right. I am sorry if I'm not. Shout outs to all my West Indians that would say, I'm not the nenen. Okay, I'm not the godmother. Now, he was a British commissioner whose intentions of the book were to more so assimilate the indigenous peoples who mainly practiced in juju, okay, and infusing that of Judeo Christian ideology within these stories. Is it right? I'm not really the person to say whether it was right or wrong. You guys, for the most part, if you've been around, you know where I stand on certain things. But I'm not here to necessarily look down upon people for what they practice. If anything, I'm here to just shed awareness on intentions because intentions is more important than anything. But the only thing that would supersede intentions is legalities, especially spiritual legalities. Sometimes you may not intend for certain things to happen, but spiritual legalities, depending on what you're into, what you indulge in, you give legal right to spirits to do things and wreak havoc or give blessings in your life. That's all I'm going to say about that. Now, either way you slice it, this story involves the idea of jealousy and really how it rears its ugly head once given the opportunity to strike. And yes, spiritual things do happen when envy and jealousy are in the picture. You can be very vulnerable spiritually to those around you that are envious. This is why it's important to get discernment of those people who are around you. You may never have to speak about it, but you have to be aware of it. Not only does this story highlight the emotion of jealousy and really how our main character for today is going to maneuver through it, but it highlights the ways in which vulnerability and ignorance, yes, vulnerability and ignorance can nurture bad friendships just with simply lack of life experience. But no matter where you've heard this story, if you have heard this story before, awesome. If you have not, I hope you enjoy it today. Either version, no matter what you hear, the same principles apply. It's the sense of community, justice, and really the art of righting your wrongs is what's really just the driving point in this story. And just my personal take on this, consider yourself blessed if you have close siblings or cousins that maybe helped you navigate the social norms of society, because not everybody necessarily has the opportunity through siblings or cousins growing up in your childhood to really understand social norms until you're basically pushed out of the bird's nest and are made to fly. For those of you who are only children, didn't grow up with cousins, all of that, you may relate to this story more than anybody about the vulnerabilities of not having that. And please chime in, whether you did or you didn't. I am here to offer up a place to connect with each other as the Trackstar family and to really dig deep into this because this is important, especially for children today. Okay, that's why I'm really doing this. I know it's entertainment for some, but I really want people to experience something that would maybe help somebody else. You never know. And with that being said, let's go ahead and begin. Our story begins in a quaint countryside field beyond the cross rivers of southwest Africa. On a small plot of land was mother, father, and our beautiful protagonist daughter, Akeem. They didn't have much, but with their few chickens and goat, they never went without. Mother and father were never like the neighboring folk, indulging in the luxuries and fancies of fine clothes, perfumes, and jewelry. The true treasure they had was in each other and little Akeem. Akeem's radiance and purity of heart were like the beams of sunshine in their once gloomy life, and their blessings had grown with intensity ever since. Being born in that of spring, they named her Akeem, the beauty of spring. As she grew from infant to child to now adolescent, each spring had fought to compete with Akeem's mesmerizing aura and grace surrounding her. She was the epitome of sophistication. In every room she walked in, her grace preceded her. Throughout her years, she spent time gardening with her mother and doing field work with her father. She never actually made time for friends or to explore the world outside of her home. When she wasn't partaking in those activities, she tended to the regular domestic duties of cleaning and washing. Akeem had unfortunately lived for the approval of her parents. Mother and father were extremely happy to have such an obedient and helpful child who never questioned nor undermined their authority and reasonings. They would always tell her that she was quote unquote perfect and how gorgeous she was and how appreciative they were for such a helpful child. But as Akeem aged into a teenager, she began to feel a void. The once satisfying, nonstop praises and adorations of her parents had now left her feeling pressured to keep up her quote unquote perfection. Akeem wouldn't dare go against the grain, so she did her best, remaining complacent in what she knew was acceptable. In her eyes, she could be nothing less than perfect. The gardening, the field work, the chores all became mundane tasks, losing its appeal. But outwardly, she kept a half smile and maintained her outward temperament. She couldn't help but to be hyper focused on her parents' lack of enthusiasm of all her completed tasks and chores from childhood to now. She noticed the shift in attitude, and anxiety began to creep up on her. Her stomach and throat in knots, anticipating that one way or another she would make a mistake and fall out of her parents' good graces. Akeem made it her number one task to keep her emotions at a standstill, even when it came to her excitement of going on her weekly trip to the village market. The allure of seeing others her age and how they lived so carefree seemed like a guilty pleasure. But the same old thought snapped her out of fantasy and back to her dull reality. What if one day I no longer am perfect? Today was market day. Mother stayed behind, but made sure to pack Akeem and father enough food and goods for a week's trip. Waving back empty handed, Akeem anxiously skipped her way off the land and onto the path as she watched Mother kiss Father. Father, struggling to walk with 6 baskets of food and goods, wobbled along shouting, "Slow down, daughter!" Rushing towards the path outside their plot of land, Father nearly ran to keep up behind the anxious Akeem as they approached a fork in the road. Certain that the left path where the river began would get them there faster, Akeem was ready to roll up her dress when Father shouted, "No, Akeem, let's take the right path across the bridge. It's longer, but it's safer." Father always made sure things were safe and boring, she thought. She was always excited to spend time with Father, but the culture and festivities just made her all the more exuberant and less focused than usual. This time of year was the most exciting. It was almost the beginning of autumn, which marked the Yam Festival. As the golden sun began to set, they approached the village square. Akeem let her guard down, becoming entranced in the captivating sea of multicolored fabrics and linens for sale. The aromas of fresh yams and delectable treats made her feet lift off the ground. Her nose, eyes, and watering mouth led Akeem through the crowd of wandering and shifty, jealous eyes. Leaving her struggling father in the crowd to tend to multiple baskets by himself, she was fascinated by the rich sense of community and culture. Making sure to keep an eye on Akeem and the baskets was a true task for father, but he decided to be lenient. After all, his daughter was perfect, but the wandering eyes that followed her were not. He could sense the possible dangers everywhere. Taking her handmade coin purse from her chest, she asked father if she could buy a white linen cloth for mother, to which he laughed in agreement. It was the very last of her money, but her eyes could not let go of how absolutely ethereal it appeared. This cloth looked like it was crafted from the heavens. Akeem quickly threw the cloth over her father's already crowded shoulders and dashed into the crowds again. As she went further and further into the center of the village, losing the gaze of her busy father, she stopped and stared at a group of 7 teenage girls jovially amongst themselves, putting on hand painted masks and beautifully crafted costumes. They laughed hysterically as they chased each other, appearing as amateur, unbridled thespians. Humored and enamored by their playful and carefree nature, Akeem caught the eye of the leader of the 7 girls. Surely Akeem had seen the girls before, but father never let Akeem talk to anybody for long without asking for assistance with another tedious task. Father never had time for fun, or understood what fun was, thought Akeem. Wanting desperately to introduce herself in efforts to form a friendship, father always found a way to inhibit. In the midst of festivities, there was no way father wasn't distracted. Today was the day. It was now or never. As she saw the leader of the pack wave to her, Akeem began meandering through the crowd towards the girls when she suddenly felt a hand on her shoulder pulling her back. You guessed it. It was father. You mustn't wander off too far where I can't see you. The world is full of distrustful people. If something were to happen to you, I would never forgive myself, and neither would mother. He grabbed her hand as her shoulders and heart sunk in defeat. She was reminded yet again to be the perfect daughter. As she swiveled her head, watching the girls behind her, they snickered and jeered and asked aloud if she was too good to play with them. As father nearly drug Akeem through the crowd to continue shopping for mother, the girls gathered in disgust as hatred burned in their hearts. Hurrying home, father and Akeem walked carefully as possible as to not draw attention to her beauty, but eyes certainly followed. Her beauty had certainly stopped a few men in their tracks, as well as the gaze of bitter women. Surely, in Akeem's mind, she was being punished for being perfect, but not acting perfectly to her parents' standards. She didn't ask for any of this, she thought. She just wanted a friend to talk to. Meanwhile, perplexed and annoyed, the seven village girls tried to make sense of Akeem and her father's disapproval of them. Pulling off their masks, each one took turns sharing their grievances within a semicircle as the crowded village began to clear and merchants disbanded amongst the night sky. Why wouldn't she want to play with us? Said one. I told you she thinks she's special, said another. Yeah, she probably thinks she's too pretty to even want to hide her face with a mask, said another. As they continued their disgruntled meeting, kicking up dirt in frustration, the leader began to think of devious thoughts. What if tomorrow we trick that vain girl into being our friend and set her up so well that she'll never be too good for anyone ever again? That should teach her. The girls nodded and laughed as they each walked their respective paths to their households. The very next day, Akeem sulked at home in the fields, doing what felt like endless chores: pulling weeds, washing the goat, tending to the chickens, cleaning the house from top to bottom, etc., etc., etc. This was at least 3 days worth of chores. Surely, she thought, this was a punishment for yesterday's antics of trying to befriend those village girls. As Akeem watched mother and father pack their baskets, making their way towards the village, father made sure to instruct that each and every task must be completed on the never ending list if she were to meet up with them. Feeling conquered once again, she began to cry whilst tending to the household chores first. After about an hour or so, the midday sun began to beat heavy on her back as she finished pulling the last of the weeds from the garden whilst wiping her brow. Rolling over and lying down on her back amongst the crops, she began to weep. Her sobs, however, stopped abruptly when she heard the familiar sounds of seven girls running and laughing down the path near the edge of her family's lot. Akeem quickly rose from the ground and wiped her tears, avoiding eye contact. After all, if it wasn't for them, she would probably get to go to the festival. Gathering the weeds into a basket with her back turned, the girls each climbed the fence, calling out, Akeem, we're going to the festival across the river. Come with us. I can't. I have work to do. Father will be furious if I go and my work is incomplete. The girls grimaced and chuckled amongst themselves as the leader replied, "Let us help you then. We can all chip in and then go together when you're finished." So, with the help of her new friends, tears of happiness gathered in Akim's eyes. Within 2 hours, they managed to complete every single assigned task. Before she could even fix her lips to thank them properly, the girls grabbed her by the hands as they frolicked to the fork in the road, splashing and playing within the forbidden river. As they continued wading into the river, Akeem, who had once let loose, began to worry, replying, "Aren't we going towards the bridge on the right?" The leader interjected, "Oh, no, no, no. That will take an extra hour or so. We don't want to miss the festivities. Come on, this is the shortcut. We go this way all the time." Watching them take their satchels across the river, she picked up on their technique on how to cross herself. Wanting to protest, Akeem stopped herself. After all, true friends wouldn't help you do all your chores and steer you in the wrong direction all in one day, right? The other girls smiled their evilest smiles at each other as they each got out of the water towards the other side of the riverbank. Akeem felt the water become colder and colder, hitting the nerve endings in her spine. She grew fatigued for a moment and nearly stopped breathing when the last of the seven yanked her by the arm out of the water and splashed her face, demanding her to stand on her feet. As Akeem stood on her feet in the muddy area, she felt a bit off. Unable to shake the impending sense of doom in the pit of her stomach, Akeem decided to ignore it and follow the girls directly down the winding paths of the festival a few yards away. As she watched the girls change from their wet clothes behind a set of bushes, Akeem, with no change of clothes, wrung out the excess water and stood in the sunset, hoping to catch somewhat of a breeze to dry her off, as a bird swooped down on her shoulder, singing a sweet song to her. The other girls, with their new festival clothes, bitterly watched as they murmured, "Even the birds sing high praises of her beauty. Who does she think she is?" As they approached the festival, the orange and purple sunset skies became complementary to the energy exchanged amongst the people. Old and young, tall and short, anybody who was anybody was there. Enjoying rice, yams, and fufu, they danced in the streets to the drums and singing of the elders. The seven girls grabbed Akeem as they danced to the beat of the drums and became the center of attention amongst the cheering crowd. Wearing their masks, Akeem was the only one without one and without festival clothes. As the village boys and all those standing around gazed upon Akeem, asking themselves, "Which village is she from? Who is that beautiful girl?" She began to feel a bit self conscious, but remembered that she would probably never get to feel this free again for a very long time. She danced herself past the point of exhaustion as several boys came to her aid to lift her from the ground. The seven girls stopped and stared in anger and envy. You could almost see the steam radiate from under the masks. Smiling and politely declining the advances of each individual boy who asked her for a dance despite her soaked clothes, she decided to make her way out of the gazing eye of the villagers and looked for a seat when a familiar hand reached out and yanked her backwards. Her stomach felt like a sinking stone. She could taste the fear in her mouth as she saw her father. Eyes raging and nostrils flared, he tried his best to remain calm. Akeem, what are you doing here? I told you not to come here. Unable to lock eyes with her father, she looked down in utter fear, trying her best to gather an explanation past her beating heart. Father, did you not say that I couldn't come unless I finished all my chores? My new village friends decided it would be best to help me, and we could travel here together. The more she explained her reasoning, the wider his eyes became. The very thing she was afraid of became true. She was no longer perfect to her parents and had lost a sense of their love for her. Thinking her father would yell at her, he quieted his voice, saying, Go home now, Akeem. We will speak to you about this in the morning. Everything we tell you to do is for your protection and well being. Making her way from the crowd towards the village's exit, the leader and the other six followed behind and tried to coax their way into getting food from the bountiful tables. In no mood to eat, anxious Akeem stood and waited for them to get their fill and stock up for the road before making their way back to the river. As they took their satchels and belongings from the festival into the river, Akeem had noticed the water was way colder. What was once fairly easy to get through as she waded across now became increasingly difficult. The water that once had barely reached her chest now was right under her nose. She barely knew how to tread water, but she would never tell her new friends that in fear of mockery. As they approached the middle of the river, Akeem noticed her friends began throwing belongings of food and gifts from the festival into a current that began to form a whirlpool. Concerned and confused, she asked, What are you doing that for? I thought you wanted to take that home. Sarcastically, they replied, No one told you? You have to make an offering to the water juju, or they'll drag you beneath the surface to never be seen again. Cackling, the girls continued to each take offerings from their pockets and toss them into the whirlpool. As they each made it across the river, safely from the middle, floated Akeem's arms thrashing against the current, begging them to share what they had so she too could give an offering. Derisive, they each yelled that they had nothing left to give, leaving poor Hakeem to a watery grave. I thought you said it was safe to cross the river, cried Hakeem. Oh, it is. I never said it was safe to cross back, said the leader, as her and the other six laughed and wrung out the excess water from their clothes. Successful in their scheme of humbling Akeem, the girls never thought twice about her parents wanting to look for her once they knew she could not go home. Their envy and jealousy blinded their reality with temporary satisfaction of a job well done. With each passing moment, Akeem felt her limbs grow numb under the water's surface, fighting to breathe past her discomfort. She could feel that she was so close to breaking the water's surface, but even time had slowed down and felt like an eternity under the water. I should have stayed home. Father was right, she thought. She had watched the girls leave and cried silently under the currents that stopped abruptly after the girls had left. They watched Akim's house from the distance, laughing, and made their way back to their village homes using the bridge on the other side of the fork in the path. Sensing that no offering would be taken from Akim, the Juju allowed the waters to go from blue to almost pitch black, with her feet stuck in mud as she tried at either bank to escape. The rushing currents would continually drag her back to the middle of the river. With each constant pull, the gravity of the situation and the water had made her restless and scared up until the wee hours of the morning. The next day, as mother and father had made their way home from the festival, they called out to Akim from the fence of their land, to which there was no reply. Feeling uneasy, they were used to their doting daughter who waited hand and foot to come running once her name was called, but grew worried and picked up speed towards their door to find her. Perhaps she is angry with me, said father to mother. I must explain to her. Perhaps I was too harsh. Mother searched high and low, to and fro, but there was no trace of her anywhere. Frantic, mother fell to her knees, tossing her belongings, screaming that Akim was missing. Tears forming in his eyes, father had kissed mother on the forehead as he assured her he would go look for her or see if any other neighboring people had seen her since last night. Father, exhausted in his efforts, nonetheless, began to feel as if the hours felt like days. With no avail, no one had confirmed that they had seen her. Desperate for answers, he crossed the bridge and trudged into the village to find the 7 girls playing and running around with their masks in their usual hangout turf. Breathless and angry, he asked them if they had seen her, to which they each shrugged their shoulders, saying they had not. Thanking the girls, he held his chest and made his way home when he smelled a peculiar scent that led him straight to a tent deviating from the path towards the bridge. His desperation had led a spiritual path to none other than a Sangoma's tent, a spiritual who was mortal but was a seer into the spirit world. With boldness, he entered the Sangoma's tent in attempts to get answers. To his surprise, he saw a frail man sitting cross legged in the middle of a dirt floor. Hazy smoke of incense surrounded him. Breaking from his trance, the Sangoma opened his eyes and asked Father why he had come to disturb him. Falling to his knees, Father sobbed and begged him to help him find his missing daughter's whereabouts. Reaching out his hand, he shushed Father, and with the other, he reached for an object covered by indigo colored cloth. In his hand was a cup he used to pour out stones and elements. In silence, he sat for what felt like forever to father, but after 2 minutes or so, the Sangoma broke his silence, saying, "Your daughter has been captured by the water spirits. When she crossed back through the river, she did not have any offerings to give, so they took her." Father could kick himself in that moment. He had never warned Akeem of the spiritual laws of why he had always took the path of the bridge and not the river, especially when coming back from the village. Father's efforts in protecting Akeem from the world without explanation had been to her detriment. Her ignorance was the product of father and mother's emotional negligence. As a waterfall of tears fell from father's eyes, he gathered himself. "Is there any way for me to get my daughter back?" "There is only one way to get your daughter back. You must bring the spirits one goat, a full basket of eggs, and a piece of pure, unblemished white cloth." Shaking, he replied, "I only have one goat for milking, a couple hens, and my daughter just bought white cloth with the very last of our money until next month. My entire family's wealth and means of food will be gone." The Sangoma replied, "You must go and decide now. Is your life worth living without your precious daughter, or are you willing to lose everything to get her back? Your time is limited." Father waited for him to speak again after several minutes, but the Sangoma refused to speak and repositioned his legs into a pretzel, closing his eyes and continued sitting in silence. Going back to the marketplace in the village, Father managed to buy a basket to put the eggs in. It was the very, very last of all their money. On his journey towards home, he gathered the courage and rehearsed the speech he would tell Mother. Not only would his monologue include where their daughter is, but what he would need to get her back. Would Mother be accepting of the terms and conditions? His feet felt heavier with every step as he crossed the fence and made his way towards the kitchen. Without a word, Mother sat down as he delivered the news. Before he could finish, she grabbed the basket from his hands and began to fill it. With the last of their eggs, she wrangled the only goat they had that was good for milk. Mother threw her white cloth in the basket, covering the eggs as Father looked down with shame. "Don't worry, we will get her back. I would rather have my daughter than have any silly cloth. When have you known me to be this flashy anyway?" said Mother. He looked up and kissed Mother on her forehead, making his way out the door as she leashed the goat and handed it to him. Making his way down to the river, eggs and cloth in one hand, and the goat leash in the other, he released the goat first into the water and watched it get swallowed up by a current. He released the cloth and pushed the basket of eggs ever so gently to the middle of the river, to which the whirlpool swallowed the basket whole. Double checking the white cloth was unblemished, he kissed it in hopes his daughter would be released immediately. As he released the cloth, a cyclone of cold, bursting water emerged 50 feet above Father's head with Akin's nearly lifeless body leaping into the air as she fell safely into his arms. The rush of water then went back down into the river as if untouched by humans or any living creature at all, returning to its crystal blue state. Blue in the face, father stared into Akim's eyes as she gasped for air, flailing her body. She desperately wanted to speak, but her throat and chest were so strained from early attempts to escape. Father shushed her and carried her home the entire way, silently yet thankful nonetheless. Mother had awaited their return anxiously, pacing back and forth from the kitchen to the front door until she saw them and ran to help carry their daughter inside to her bed. Kissing her husband profusely, they cried, holding each other as they watched Akim recover from her labored breathing. If not for the faint rising and falling of her chest, one would almost think she was dead, the way her face looked so pale. A few hours later, when Akim managed to catch her breath, she called out to her father, "Father, it's true. Those girls plan to keep me in that river. They plan to do that to me the entire time." As she cried in great remorse, he had played back the entirety of the events leading up to this moment in his head, putting two and two together. From the first day to the pulling back of Akin's hand, to the helping of her chores, and to the crossing of the river, he would think of an even better plot to avenge his daughter under the guise of a coming home celebration. That night, Mother had turned to talk to Father in bed, but instead, she found him in the middle of the night digging a hole in their living room floor. Placing dry palm leaves and stakes, he created a pit for the seven to fall into. He then took seven small rugs and seven masks to sit on each, placing his finest enormous mat on top of the hole as a disguise. He warned Mother and Akin not to step near the entrapment. As Father went back to sleep and Mother prepared a delicious feast of the last of their food supply, news had spread far and wide of Akin's miraculous encounter and her return home. Mother had made sure to apologize to Akin for never giving her the opportunity nor the techniques to discern people for herself. Both of her parents had shielded her way too much. As they shared a hug, Father had made sure they all knew the game plan for what lay ahead. Multiple people had come to celebrate outside their lot of land and to gift Akin many different foods and cloth and such in hopes to ease the family's burden of sacrificing all they had to the water juju. When the news got to the seven jealous girls, the girls and their families, who were in disbelief, made their way from the village and had come to see with their own eyes if what they heard was true. When father saw the girls, he welcomed them and their families only inside of their house, directing to the kitchen to eat. As the families of the girls remained outside to partake in the other activities, father directed the seven girls into the living room where Akin sat patiently, awaiting their expressions as they looked at her like she was a ghost. Shocked to see Akeen in the flesh, Akeen gave a half smile as her eyes widened with anger. Placing a brass rod around each of the seven girls' necks like gold medals, Father thanked each of them for being so quote unquote kind and welcoming to Akeen in his absence when going to the market and festival with Mother. After giving each of them a glass of palm wine to drink, he then told them, I had the pleasure of taking seven masks from my own collection to give you each a gift on those rugs. I was hoping you could act out the same plays you do in your hangout spot in the village. Mother, who could not bear to see the sight of what would happen next, left the hot embers of the fire in the kitchen as father instructed the night prior, and met with all the other bystanders outside to enjoy the singing and dancing. Father, however, instructed the girls to each take a seat across the living room on the mats when all of a sudden, as they collectively walked across, they all fell in the leaf covered pit. Screaming in agony, the girls tried their hardest to climb out of the ditch, but were unsuccessful with the brass rods around their necks. Like crabs in a barrel, they began to feel the heat as Akeen gave the signal, allowing father to go to the kitchen and cover the girls and the brass rods in red hot embers from the fire, burying them alive. Throwing some of the embers onto the leaves, they watched as the flame grew in intensity. The cries and wails of pain scared off the people outside until they all ran back to their respective homes in the neighboring villages, watching smoke and hearing screams grow throughout the side of the house. Putting out the fire with river water, they left the pit of the Seven's remains and slept peacefully that night as if nothing had happened. The next day, the families of the seven daughters had went to the chief priest of the village to recount the horrors of the previous day's events. As the chief called father for an explanation of his savage nature, he began to narrate why his daughter's life had been threatened because of them. When father had finished his story, the chief then replied, It would have been more fitting if you were to have dealt with only the ringleader and not all seven girls. I wish to meet your daughter. Bring her here to make my final judgment. However, upon Akim's arrival, the chief stood to his feet, jaw to the floor. He then understood with Akim's beauty and poise why he had done what he did. Dismissing the case against Akeen's father, the seven girls' families were then ordered to mourn for their jealous daughters in solitude, as they had gotten what they deserved. The lesson being that envy and jealousy will never put you in places of high regard. And that, track stars, is the end of today's content. If if you are in the live chat right now, put a 1 in the chat if you have heard of this story before of the pretty girl and seven jealous women. Put a 2 in the chat if you have never heard of this story and today is your first time ever experiencing this crazy story. And Again, some of you are wondering why, Shayna, would you start a friendship series with a kind of story like this? Do you see the dangers of not allowing your children to experience the world without you, without your perspectives, without your caution? I'm not saying throw all caution to the wind, but there is such a thing called balance. If there's anything I can stress on this channel and what we've spoken about already when it comes to everything, it's balance. Balance of power, balance of influence, reciprocity. All of these things will keep you grounded, and not only keep you grounded, but will heal you from past traumas. We spoke about traumas and triggers. We spoke about all of that in our cassette tapes, all of that. If there's one thing that I can give you for this episode as a takeaway, it would be this: the way children hide their trauma behind good behavior, shyness, and people pleasing can cripple you as an adult, because some children who were raised to be their best, to stay away from people, and to people please, mostly their parents, sadly, they're pushed into the world as an adult, as people who have to fend for themselves, to establish their own personality, and their voice that has always been silenced, now given the freedom to speak, some may never want to speak. And then if you don't solve these type of issues before having children, before being married, before forming friendships, do you see how dangerous this is? Parents, if you're listening to this, please allow your children to form friendships, even the ones that you don't approve of, because, like my father says, a hard head makes a soft ass. What they decide ultimately will teach them. I'm not saying don't take care of your kids. I'm saying sometimes questioning them can come with a price. And there's a difference between questioning your children for understanding, questioning them so much that they don't even feel that they're allowed to have an identity outside of yours. Just think of that. Think of the things that your parents have put you through in order to break up friendships. Maybe they saw things you didn't. Maybe they were wrong. Now think about you as a parent. How or what would you do to go about just breaking up those bad habits that maybe your parents or grandparents did to you, or your parents? How do you go about fixing that? Good questions, right? Well, here's where I bring in the announcement. As of today, May 9th, I'm going to extend this social experiment of this channel. And in the community feed, I'm going to provide an email address to keep the anonymity of each and every one of you that decides to participate, I'm going to welcome you to share your thoughts of the discussions on this channel, the series, whether this one we have now with the friendship or any previous series. Let me know how this channel has impacted you, or if you maybe just have a question or you want to start an open discussion about certain things that have been said on this channel, I welcome it. My email is one track record 23 at gmail.com. And again, in the description of your email, in the title, just specify if you'd like to remain anonymous or if you don't mind identifying yourself. But eventually, these emails will lead to more and more open discussions, possibly lives, so you guys can chime in on Sundays. I'm going to leave Sundays as a day just to kick back and have open discussions. And on Wednesday, if there's content, I'm going to introduce content for Wednesdays. Aha. I told you I was going to be more engaged. But anywho, thank you. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for dealing with me. Thank you for allowing me to come on this platform and just hug and kiss you through the screen each and every week. We have been going steady. Time is going by so quickly, and there's a lot of work to be done. But what makes the work so worthwhile is the engagement of all of you, all of the track stars on this channel. I thank you so much for giving me your time. I don't take any of you for granted. If you'd like to speak to me outside of email, you can always hit me up on Instagram. I promise I'm not intimidating. And again, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It's so humbling. Those of you who have sent donations, thank you. I I could cry, honestly, cuz I don't do this for money, but every little bit helps. It helps with the content itself enhancing the quality. I thank you. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. I am going to leave the email address for you again in the community feed after this live. And I will type and talk with you later. Bye, track stars.